Burial is no stranger to ambient music, as he already has a couple of projects underneath his belt in that regard, but I feel like Antidawn is definitely his most interesting venture yet. Although I heavily prefer his future garage sound, Antidawn is a pretty solid effort. The rainfield atmospheres alongside the broken and manipulated vocal samples makes for quite an engaging soundscape to listen to. I was constantly trying to peer ahead in the songs, trying to look further ahead with my ears, if that makes sense. And that's not just because the sound is so interesting. The compositions can be straight up beautiful at times. They can reach some pretty emotionally potent heights with songs like Strange Neighborhood, New Love, and Shadow Neighbors. The EP is plagued by looping scenery, however, mostly because the project's palette isn't very diverse. It makes sense thematically, but I definitely would have preferred to have been able to differentiate the sounds and sights of each song. But overall, I thought it was pretty enjoyable. Not a fan of this one at all. No siree. RuPaul is as flashy and as flamboyant as ever, but man, the attempts at hyperpop and hip house and EDM are hideous. The overabundances of trend chasing and contemporary influences are painful to hear, especially on the song Blame It on the Edit, which to me is the worst song of the year so far. Other tracks that absolutely napalmed my ears include Pretty Pretty Gang Gang, Smile, and Queendom. That's not to say there wasn't a track or two I enjoyed. I liked the Catwalk reprise a little bit. I dug the way RuPaul sang on that, and I like the zaniness of Who Is She, but in terms of what I enjoyed on the album, that's the cutoff line. That's it right there. My advice is, if you were planning to listen to this album, just listen to Todrick Hall's Femuline. It's 1,000 times better. This is a pretty cool collection of minimal house tracks that have a very video game sense to them, which makes sense considering who the artist is. There is very little in terms of progression on any of these songs. It's virtually non-existent. Once you hear the first 10 seconds of a song, that groove will last the entirety of the song, so you're either in or you're out, and for a good chunk of the album, I was in. It served as nice background music while I was working, with a couple of standouts like the icy silent chord, the bounciness of Bamboo Fighter, the funkalicious marimbo, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the aquatic runners. These tracks prioritize grooves and rhythms, whereas some of the other ones try to convey this metropolitan ambience to them that just doesn't quite work, in my opinion. It might not be like the deepest or most fulfilling house album, but it's nice to put on in the background and just vibe. Coruscate is one of the more sonically detailed and depthful future-based albums I've heard in a bit. There are so many different patterns and sound effects and textures and samples alongside the frantic, colorful beats and vapory soundscapes. While the songs might sound cluttered and disorganized on the surface, the underlying melodies and rhythms are all composed in such fulfilling fashion. Some of the sky-high moments these songs get to are straight up magical, with songs like Revealing Light, Tethered to You, Think Lavender. Even if you aren't jiving with the song, there is just a lot to appreciate in terms of how many layers and things are just going on at once. I will say I do wish a handful of tracks had a stronger direction to them rather than serving as essentially tech demos for what Vale-Smith is capable of. But overall, I think this is a really good album, and I am eager to hear more. This is one of 4 albums released by Chance de la Soul this year, and I will talk about the other 3 in the following weeks. The one I listened to first is Decides, and I have to say I really liked it. Most future funk artists often walk down the already paved path, unwilling to take risks with the sound, which to me isn't very appealing. I've always been a huge fan of Chance's sound, mostly because their brand of vaporwave and future funk has this aura about it that is able to stand out from the rest. Decides has some pretty beautiful songs that make the most of their samples. The saxophone on Again is irresistible. Dance Dance sounds like an Avalanche's track with the talking samples over the disco grooves. And Technicolor Dream is just my favorite song on here for sure. There are a few tracks that didn't quite do it for me, but I wouldn't say they're bad by any means. Give this one a shot. I think a lot of people will dig it, and I am eager to talk about the other 3 in the following weeks. Long story short, this is sonic music on steroids. Digimaiden is made up of breakcore and drum and bass, both of which emphasize this video gamey atmosphere, but not without going absolutely crazy at points. The beats are torrid and blistering fast. It can definitely get overwhelming with just how insanely high some of these tracks' BPM can get, and that alone might drive away some people, but for me, I thought this was a pretty enjoyable album. Songs like 1,000,001 Mola and Endless Higanbana are just pure speed and definitely helped me power through a couple of sets at the gym. I do admit the non-stop and overly familiar barrage of drums can induce a bit of fatigue as I progress through the album, but I think it did a decent job of mellowing out the chaos for a bit with softer and sonically nuanced segments with songs like Inner Core and Magmatic Refinery. I'm typically not one for overly breakcore albums, but this one surprised me and I think it'll surprise others too. This is the year's most pristine release, and I don't know if anything else that comes out this year will even compare to its beauty. Trying to analyze the songs by themselves will not do the album justice because, in my opinion, it is best experienced and talked about in its entirety. It's ethereal, it's mystical, it's emotional, the piano performances are awe-inspiring, and do a lot of the heavy lifting as it helps accentuate the background strings as well as the emotions and tones that the sound is trying to deliver. For me, it was like I was experiencing many forms of euphoria, sadness, and revelation, and as I kept replaying the album, there were just more connections I was building with the sound. There wasn't a single lull or underwhelming moment for me on the entire album. I loved it. This is a pretty dope sci-fi / space opera metal album. The opening song especially had me hooked, and pretty amped to hear the rest of it because it is such an enticing song. It leaves such a lasting impression. With its soaring vocals, riveting riffs, and depthful sci-fi elements, it made the rest of the track listing seem like it was just as rife with potential. And though no other track, for me at least, reaches that peak, there's still some pretty good stuff on here. Sacrifice Zone, the title track, and The Embers of Old Earth were some highlights for me in due part to how elevating the sound can be. I will say it is too one note for its own good. The instrumental and vocal approaches echoes one another pretty heavily on every song, and it just makes you want more from it sonically and thematically. But again, for what is here, it's pretty cool. I was so underwhelmed by this album, which is a shame because I really liked his last one. I came away from it excited at the prospect that there was nowhere to go but up from Gupi. But on this new one, the songs are just nowhere near as memorable to me, despite how highly impressive its technical aspects are and the daring notion to go absolutely ballistic with mixing and mashing genres of EDM, hyperpop, bubblegum bass, and dubstep. I felt like the approaches for each song got too similar to one another to the point where it started diluting my enjoyment by the song. The album's flow is pretty weak too, especially since the tracks can be easily telegraphed and leave little reason to be invested in them when you're listening to them back to back to back to back to back. The technical prowess is there, it's just the music itself just didn't do it for me. I feel very similarly about this album like I do the Soichi Terada one I mentioned earlier in the video. It's a very animated house record in comparison that doesn't push itself too far from its central appeal. And for me, I wish it did because the sample work is great and the production here has an airy 80s dance feel to it that I think a lot of people can really jive with. It has a great foundation to warrant trying new things, but it most oftentimes doesn't, and those spots are definitely the weakest on the album, especially in the middle portion of it. But I will say it starts and ends pretty well. Songs like The Boss, Strangerous, which has chopped vocal line samples from Stranger Things sequenced in a pretty addicting fashion, was pretty cool. Dragonfly and Patty Cake were also surefire highlights for me. Overall, I like the sound. I wish there was more to it, but again, it's pretty nice to have on in the background. Moving to the sounds of 80s synthwave and synthpop was the best decision the Weeknd has ever made, mostly because he is tailor-made for this sound. Dawn FM is my favorite Weeknd album by far, and how could it not be with how many quality tracks are on here? Gasoline, How Do I Make You Love Me, Take My Breath, Sacrifice, Out of Time, Best Friends, Don't Break My Heart, Less Than Zero. He's able to bring out the best of both himself and the sound because he just gels with it seamlessly. The album would have benefited from a bit of trimming though, in my opinion, because it is a concept album and a few tracks just felt out of place and unnecessary. The tracks with Tyler and Lil Wayne were pretty distracting in the grand scheme of things. They stuck out like a sore thumb to me. And the songs Starry Eyes and Every Angel is Terrifying bring absolutely nothing of value to the overall album experience. They're just pure padding. But like I said, it's my favorite Weeknd album, and apparently this is the beginning of a new trilogy, so there's a lot to look forward to in the future. It's Dance with the Dead, bitch. Of course this shit rips. Their blend of heavy metal and synthwave is unparalleled, and they do not disappoint with this new one at all. There isn't a single song on here I dislike. The riffs slam, the synths are delicious. Some of my favorites include the Fiery Firebird, the Punishing Sledge, the Voyeuristic Kiss of the Creature, and the Nocturnal Nebula. This is my favorite album of last week, and I highly recommend it. So those are the albums I listened to last week. What did you guys listen to? What were your thoughts on them? Leave your comments down below, consider subscribing, and I will see you guys on the next video. Thank you for watching.